Yes. Um, and now I'd like to introduce Hriar Cabayan. Hriar is a multi-year expert in working with the Pentagon for 20 years and over. And also he organizes these kind of discussions and helping us to organize, to bring in experts like today's our expert Gerard Libaridian. Hriar, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Hagop, for the intro, and uh, I, I want to thank you all for participating. I'm assuming you have the announcement, and I don't need to introduce Giro. Giro is very well known, um, so I'm not going to take a lot of time reading his bio. It's in the thing. You all know him. So what we're going to do is I'm gonna spend about 45 to 60 minutes. We want to make this not go on and on. So 45, 60 minutes. I have sets of questions to him. And while he's responding to the questions I'm going to ask him, please put your questions in the chat box because we're going to try to address them at the end. I already received uh, a question from Nerses Kopalyan, who is on his way to LA, so he couldn't physically join in, but he did send me his question he has, and I'll read that, and then Girard will address it. So the way we're gonna do this, I have four. So during the first 45, hopefully 60 minutes, we're going to go through four areas that I'm going to raise with Girard with questions. The first one is the agreement that was signed and its ramifications, big, broad perspective. Then we're going to go from there and focus on its implications for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. So that's topic two. Topic three is the reaction of key actors, and we're gonna get to that. And at the end, I'm gonna ask Gerard to start looking ahead. Where do we go from here? Which is, I think, many of you are interested in. So Gerard, if you're all set, I'm gonna start. Uh, Raise my first questions that I would like you to address regarding the agreement and its broad ramifications. So this is it. To set the stage, can you briefly provide our viewers a preliminary bird's eye view, broad assessment of the agreement reached in Washington on August 8 between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Over to you, Girard.
Thank you, Rai. Thank you, Agop, and thank you, ARPA, for this opportunity. It is very important uh, to find ways of thinking about these agreements that are constructive and somewhat detached from daily politics. If you remember, for many months, if not a year or two, major discussion in Armenian discourse was territorial integrity, will we lose Armenia, etc. Now, from that point of view, we have a fundamental document. That is a document, the peace agreement, that was that provides for it, as well as the joint Armenia-Azerbaijan document, statement witnessed by President Trump. So it is a document that unreservedly commits the signing parties, signatories, Azerbaijan and Armenia, to respect for for sovereignty, for non-use of force, for territorial integrity. So no document solves all problems, and no document solves even this problem. But to have an agreement where this is expressed, articulated clearly, is certainly a positive move toward that fundamental, what was called the existential question. So undoubtedly, it's a positive step. That's the overall agreement. Now, on August 8th, there were 8 excuse me, I think 7 agreements. One was the peace agreement that had been negotiated between Armenia and Azerbaijan that was initial. One is the joint Armenia-Azerbaijan declaration that has a number of important items. There are 3 memoranda of understanding between US and Armenia, one between US and Azerbaijan, and one joint statement, a joint request by Armenia and Azerbaijan for the ending of the Minsk Group. So we're dealing with a number of documents, not just one. The most important ones, the peace agreement that was initialed, not yet fully signed, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the issue of the Minsk Group asking OSCE to end it, and to some extent, the issue of the Azerbaijan-Nakhchivan transit route. These were mostly all agreed upon, or mostly agreed upon, between the 2 countries directly. This is extremely important. This is extremely important. And we will see if, how far we go. But the memoranda of understanding are on specific issues. But overall, my assessment is that this is a very positive step. This should give some comfort to our people in Armenia, and they should answer some questions that have been raised with regard to the current policies of Yerevan.
Well, thank you very much, Gerard, for this brief but very insightful introduction. Again, we have a good set of participants today, so please, as the questions come up, put them in the chat box. We're going to get to them at the end, trust me. So let me go on here with my second question to Gerard, and this is it. You state in the article, and by the way, the links to the 2 articles in Armenian and in English were provided by Hagop in the announcement, so you should be able to click and read them if you haven't already. So in the article, Gerard, you state the following: most of these agreements were agreed upon prior to the leaders' visit to the American capital, and done so in direct negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Can you briefly explain, Gerard?
Well, the text of the peace agreement itself, 17 articles, was agreed upon before Washington. So that's number 1. Number 2, there have been 3 levels of communications between Yerevan and Baku, direct. One is the commissions on the border, delineation and demarcation. The second is the communication between the ministers of foreign affairs that ended up finalizing that text. The third is a very high-level confidential negotiations between the 2. So what that means is that there's a level of trust between the 2 countries that didn't exist before for a long time. And that is, for me, the critical element of these agreements. Now, each country had its own reason to go to Washington. But without their trust in each other and the development and formulation of these agreements, Washington had no way to compel Armenia or Azerbaijan to go to Washington. So the key for me in the future is whether this trust is built upon, and the implementation of these agreements, which in many cases are very general, whether the implementation succeeds or not. Depends on these direct negotiations.
Perfect. Okay, Giro, thank you. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to focus on each on Armenia, then Azerbaijan, and then Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, as you outline them in the article. So first of all, focusing on Armenia, please provide brief explanation to the following statements you make. First one, these documents strengthen the preservation of its sovereignty and the security of its territorial integrity. That's one. And the second, you state these arrangements increase the strategic significance of Armenia, which has been left out of South Caucasus transit routes of international significance. So can you
Sure.
provide some background information?
Both the peace agreement between the two countries and the joint statement articulate clearly principles that are international and principles that are important for Armenia. That is the respect by Azerbaijan for the territorial integrity of Armenia, for its sovereignty, and for the non-use of force. And the territorial integrity on the basis of the 1991 Bishkek agreements. That is, there are some areas that are still occupied by Azerbaijan in Armenia, and Armenia has some that controls from Azerbaijan. That is, we have a now very common understanding of what that territory is for each country. So that's number one. And as I said earlier, documents are important, but they do not determine fate. But we know that Azerbaijan has now recognized internationally in documents that it will respect Armenia's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and it will also not use force to solve remaining problems. This is number one. It's very important. Now, the second point is with regard to the international significance of Armenia. Armenia had been left out of all regional and international projects. It had become a non-participant in a region, in projects in a region where it occupies a central place. So everything was going around, pipelines for gas and oil and transport routes, either Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, or Azerbaijan, Iran. So now we have the possibility of Armenia acquiring a strategic significance with the opening of communications.
So let's now move on and now focus on Azerbaijan, which is my fourth topic in here. So focusing on Azerbaijan, can you briefly explain to our viewers the key issues Azerbaijan has raised as obstacles to signing a peace agreement?
Well, there have been a number of issues, but at this point, Azerbaijan is satisfied with the formula that is found with regard to the Nakhchivan-Azerbaijan transit route. It seems to be satisfied, although that project is described in very general terms. I don't know if there's a more detailed description that is not published, but what is published is in very general terms. But Baku seems to be satisfied with that. So that's number one. The other issue is still remaining, and that is what Azerbaijan considers the need for Armenia to change its constitution, the preamble of which makes reference to items which Baku considers claims against Azerbaijani territory. And that would refer, of course, to Karabakh. That still remains. And as far as I know, as far as I can read, that is the only issue remaining as far as Azerbaijan is concerned for the signing. Now, Armenia, according to this government, has its own reasons to change the constitution, and those changes do not depend, but may include both the principle and the wording of nothing that will make any claims against Azerbaijan.
Okay, so let's move on right now and look and focus on the Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. You make several points along those lines. So you state first that Azerbaijan and Armenia have reaffirmed their commitment to relevant principles through bilateral processes. Can you please briefly explain and discuss important issues that were left out?
Well, there were first no agreement, not even a peace agreement, will solve all problems. If the agreement provides for the two countries to establish normal diplomatic relations, the purpose of which is to solve remaining problems peacefully through diplomacy, through negotiations. And the peace agreement does provide for that. So once that peace agreement is in effect and diplomatic relations are established, then you have normal ways to resolve. Turkey and Greece have so many issues. So many countries between them have so many issues, but they have diplomatic relations, and they do this through diplomatic relations. They do it through those negotiations that diplomacy allows.
Perfect. Okay, so staying on the issue of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, there's another question I have for you, and it's the following. What headwinds Yerevan and Baku face to continue working together to build on what was achieved?
Well, there's a number of them. First, whether they will build on the trust they have built so far, or for whatever reasons, they're going to end up relying on international forces, international factors, which is always a problem. I personally, even as a diplomat, as a person who thinks about these issues, have always advocated the primacy of direct relations. Now, beyond that, of course, we have those who do not think this solution, these documents, and particularly the transit route issue, is a good solution. Russia is part of it. Iran is part of that group. And for them, it goes counter to their imagination of how the region should look like. So in Armenia, we also have opposition to this route. And in Azerbaijan, there is some opposition to this route because they think the dropping of the word corridor, which doesn't exist in any of the documents, and instead use of communications, and so they think that this is a concession on the part of Azerbaijan. In Armenia, they think this is a concession on sovereignty. But there's no, at this point, any evidence that it is a concession on sovereignty, because the National Assembly of Armenia will have to provide, to adopt a law that regulates that issue. Now, beyond that, of course, we have interests in Russian interests in the region. We have Iranian interests. And I'd like to say something what I think is very important in this case. We imagine Russia and Iran as countries whose interests are immovable and whose the strategies to pursue these interests are immovable. That is, there's a fixed Russia, there's a fixed Iran. We know that in Iran today, there's a big debate within the government on whether this could be, this new arrangement with some US participation could be also beneficial to Iran. I don't know about Russia, whether there's such a thing, but I know that Russia's interests may be quite permanent, but its strategy to pursue them is not immovable. I remember when I was in the government of Armenia in the 90s, and we were trying to imagine the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. And there were so many experts who thought that it's impossible because Russia will not allow it. And I have to admit, I was one of those who didn't think it would happen. But then it happened, and Russia bought into the system. So interests may be quite fixed, but how you pursue them and to what extent you adjust these interests to realities on the ground are a different thing. This is a very, very important point in terms of assessing, all right, the value of what is happening now. I'm not arguing that I'm very happy with the corridor, what it used to be called the corridor issue. I don't trust the American diplomacy. It's very simple. And its commitment. We know that it depends on one person and whatever forces that impact that person. But I'd say that it seems that both Armenia and Azerbaijan are satisfied with this solution. And whether it works or not depends on how they work together in the future. So the impact on the region is dependent on these two countries. One other assumption, Hriar, that I don't, I question is whether some analysts think that everything is decided in Washington or Moscow or Washington and Moscow. This disregards completely the local actors. The local actors may have limited means, but they do matter. Local actors caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. Local actors have caused the collapse of empires. And to think of empires or post-imperial mindsets as permanent and dominant, independent of local actors, has been proven wrong by history over 2,000 years. Otherwise, empires would have survived. The Roman Empire would have survived.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. So now let's move on and look at the reactions of the key actors who are in the region and beyond. So here are the questions. So let's start off. Can you briefly provide our viewers with perceptions of these agreements by key actors? First one, Russia's perception and potential future behavior given its historical involvement in the region.
And what is the question?
So Russia's perception and potential future behavior, potential future, given its historical involvement in the region.
Well, Russia has very serious interests in the South Caucasus, no doubt. But Russia, whose diplomacy I've always admired, recently has mismanaged its relations with Armenia and Azerbaijan. It has taken Armenia for granted. It allowed Azerbaijan to occupy all of Garapa, to take all of Garapa, as it insisted on its territorial integrity. It allowed the ethnic cleansing of Garapa without a word. And it also did not fulfill its treaty obligations, both bilateral and multilateral, toward Armenia when Azerbaijan moved into Armenian territory in the south. And it said, we don't know Armenia's borders. So, and since then, it has led a campaign to impact domestic politics in a manner that is inconsistent with international principles and treaty obligations. So Russia has mismanaged. Russia has taken Armenia for granted. And one way it has done so by always talking about genocide, about encouraging talk about genocide, which should be talked about in a dignified manner, but not in the service of other countries, such as Netanyahu's recent statement, which is insulting. But going back to Russia and Armenia, it will depend, Russia's future will depend on whether it starts respecting more Armenia's interests as defined by Yerevan, but not Moscow. Moscow should not define Armenia's interests. The foreign minister of Russia, Minister Lavrov, gets up in Moscow at his level at a press conference and teaches our people the value of the church. Regardless of what happens in Armenia, it is not the job of the foreign minister of Russia to teach Armenians the value of the church. What that means is that they still think in terms of the imperial mindset. They decide what should be important for Armenia or not. So the future of Russia's relations and in presence in the South Caucasus, and the expectation that all three countries respect Russia's interests, depend on how Russia defines its interests and what strategy it uses.
Great. So let's move on now to another big actors in the region, and that's Iran's perception and behavior. So over to you, Gerard.
Well, we have the same issue. Although Iran has been much more respectful of Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and there has been little area, a very little area where Armenia and Iran have had problems. Now, I understand fully having any American presence in that transit route, considering the US position with regard to Iran. That is a very legitimate concern. But there too, my point about defining interests and strategies to pursue them should not be seen as fixed and permanent. In Iran, we see a very open conflict between those who go by the imperial mindset in Iran, or those who say this could be an opportunity for an opening for Iran to the north, to the west, and to minimize conflict with the US and benefit Iran's economy. So when we look at these big neighbors, we shouldn't look at them as fixed and non-thinking entities that have been given the 10 commandments on what they are and how they behave. Each one of those has the opportunity, and in Iran we see the open debate, a very healthy debate, on how to look at this possibility, but also to work with Armenia, and this applies to Russia too, to work with Armenia on what kind of arrangement to, in fact, articulate in the National Assembly law that will regulate that transit route.
Okay, moving on to the US. So the U.S., what are the U.S. long-term engagement given its limited interest in the region?
Well, there's a first-level interest in President Trump trying to get another accolade, to get another line on his CV as a peacemaker. And that's how, in fact, what happened in Washington was Washington plucking the ripe fruits. Now, the documents that have been signed, the memoranda of understanding in artificial intelligence, in energy security, and the crossroads of peace, these are very general statements. These are very general statements that do not have any specifics, do not have any security commitments, do not have any financial commitments. These are documents that say this is what we want to do. And given policymaking in Washington, I am not sure that these will end up being changing interests that are somehow distant to any immediate vital interests. That region will never be a region of vital interest to the US. It has never been. We know from the first Trump administration with the 2020 war and 23 war that it did nothing. It did nothing. So we cannot rely on the US for security. We can rely on cooperation unless Washington has other issues to deal with, which it has. So it's a big question mark in my mind. I have said that from what I understand, the people in the State Department who really knew the issues were removed and they're not there anymore. So I'm not sure how decisions are made today and how deep they go.
All right, so moving on to the last key actor, regional actor, and that's Turkey. So the question is Turkey's potential behavior regarding normalization of relations with Armenia. What are your thoughts?
Well, for some time now, Turkey has outsourced its foreign policy with regard to Armenia to Baku. We know that. We also know that Baku is not altogether that happy with the position it has taken, that its position and its policy to develop normalizing relations with Armenia now depends on Baku. But they seem to be continuing that. On the other hand, there's a wider consciousness that Turkey's interests now may include normalization with Armenia for its own reasons. So it's also, so that's a fluid situation in my mind.
Okay, very well. So now let's shift gears and look forward. So my first question to you along those lines, you state one should look forward to making the South Caucasus a political concept and not just a geographic one. Can you please explain?
Well, this is somewhat of an old idea that I've had. If you look at all the analyses of the South Caucasus region, number one, you see that all of them consider it a transit route, a transit region. It's important because pipelines go through it, future transports go through it. It has rarely been considered as a region in itself, that it's got peoples, and these peoples, Georgians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, are not just pawns on the chessboard. They are peoples that have interests. They want to have their future. They are peoples whose words count. So the idea is that so far, South Caucasus is a South Caucasus only by geography, but can you imagine after 30 years plus of independence of the three republics, there's not a single project that is done by the three of them together. Nothing. It's unimaginable. But people, experts, and others don't even think about it because they're geopolitics. There's no local politics. Well, my idea is that, and as long as that is the case, then all three republics are more vulnerable to external factors, external forces, and external interests that defy their own interests, the interests of their own people. So the idea is that there should be some political, in the largest sense, at the beginning not strategic, but political cooperation on humanitarian, in humanitarian areas. For example, natural disaster relief. Earthquakes happen, fires happen in all three republics and areas of those republics that are adjacent to each other. Don't you think it would be useful for these three to cooperate? It might be easier for Azerbaijan to bring help for an earthquake in northern Armenia than Yerevan in terms of time. Don't you think it would be the same for Armenian earthquake relief workers to go to parts of Azerbaijan that are more accessible than Baku? This is one idea. The other is human trafficking, drug trafficking, epidemics. So once these three republics start, and these are not expensive propositions, these are merely a matter of political imagination, that these three republics owe each other something and can help each other, and begin with these humanitarian areas, and then you can develop to other areas. And all of this will give the peoples of the three republics a stronger sense of comfort, of solidarity, of being able to rely on themselves. At the end, Armenia has no allies. Armenia has no allies. We've seen it. The closest ally, so to speak, Russia, for 200 years, did not fulfill and still expected Armenia to be subservient. Armenia has no allies. Armenia has to develop good relations with all of its neighbors. My point is that there are, Hriar, all these debates, all these detailed discussions, they deal with one fundamental issue that has been our issue for the last 30, 40 years, and maybe 200 years. Is Armenia an implant that can survive only with commitments by others, alliances by foreign countries, the closest being Russia, France, US? Is Armenia a country only because if they support, and we know that support is not strategic, it's not military? Is Armenia that, which makes it an implant against its neighbors, or is Armenia a local native power, a native country, a native people whose neighbors happen to be the neighbors we have? We cannot change our neighbors. These are the neighbors. And this is where we have to work with our neighbors to get security from minimizing the threats they present, maximizing the cooperation they can offer.
Perfect. Thank you, Giro. So I think let's move on right now. I'm done with all the questions I had for you. You addressed them all. So let's move on with the questions coming in from the audience. I'm going to start with the first one by Nerses Kopalyan. Nerses couldn't join us today because he's flying to LA. So this is the question he has for you. There are two schools of thought in qualifying Aliyev's penchant or aversion to peace. One believes that if all the conditions are met, he will agree to it, while the other, of which I am a proponent, contends that it is against Aliyev's strategic interests as a rational actor to agree to peace. Then he goes on to say the primary variable defining this premise is Aliyev's fundamental and ultimate objective of maintaining the power disparity with Armenia and acting as the small sub-hegemon of the region. So can you please give your thoughts on the relationship between Aliyev's endeavor of maintaining the power disparity, in parentheses, and he says in parentheses, which he has worked on 2 decades and spent billions, and his propensity of signing a peace treaty, which in his thinking diminishes the power asymmetry he has worked on so hard to establish?
Well, I see. It's a very good question, because that question in various forms exists in people's minds, a lot of people's minds. But I think there's some problems. There's some problems with that. That is, it assumes that Aliyev is a fixed person, that when he came to power, he's the same person, had the same thoughts as what he has now. I know for a fact, since I know him personally and have a very lengthy discussion some years ago, but I know that what he thinks now is not what he thought in 2003. That is, that kind of logic assumes that what we say and do, what we have said and done, does not matter to Aliyev or to others. This is a fundamental fault in our political thinking. That is, Aliyev is fixed, and nothing we did or said made a difference in where he went. My second point is that being a rational actor doesn't mean that you think only in one track. That is, each definition of a rational actor has assumptions that are different from another. You can be a rational actor by thinking in opposite terms, with opposite assumptions. That is, for example, I do not think that Aliyev had decided in 2003 or earlier, he became president in 2003, that he was going to occupy Karabakh and he was going to do ethnic cleansing. That wasn't his position. He changed over time with the absence of a solution, with the absence of a compromise solution. That is, a rational actor, a real rational actor, has a number of scenarios that are possible, not just one. When an expert defines a rational actor as having one set of assumptions and one possible solution, then there's something missing there. The way I think is, rational actors have a number of possibilities. If they only fixed on one, they're not rational, especially for small countries. You cannot be the leader of a small country, even though Azerbaijan is not that small, but it's still relatively small, and have one scenario for yourself as the solution and hold it for over 20 years. You cannot do it. So when we think about rational actors will have, must have, and usually have different possibilities. Now, the third point I make about that is that trying to be a hegemon does not exclude signing a peace agreement. You can be a hegemon. In fact, hegemons will want peace. That's one argument, right? That's one rational argument. So that I can enjoy my hegemon position. You want peace because you've created a power relationship. Nothing in these documents indicate that Aliyev wants to be a hegemon. I think he does want to be a hegemon, but this does not exclude. At some point, he may think the absence of peace is the only way to be a hegemon. He may have, but he doesn't think so now. Because for Aliyev, it is even more important to be accepted internationally, to be accepted in Washington, to see the decrease to the challenges to his regime. And he needs a lot of Western technology, new technology, and financial investments to continue the production of his hydrocarbon resources. He needs those. And for that, that requires a different kind of rational thinking, and that includes making peace with Armenia. Possibly. I don't exclude anything else, but we need to be sure as to what we mean by rational actor.
Okay, so let's move on now with the questions from the audience. There are quite a bit, and my screen here for some reason is a little blurred. So if I don't quite, so there's a first question is from Ashot, and he's asking, any guess as to how many billions will Armenia benefit from transit of goods from China to Europe from this route? Will this be a transformational wealth for Armenia?
I don't have any guesses. I'm not into that field. I have not made any calculations. I don't know the answer to that specific question. I do know that Armenia needs peace and some security with regard to the future for new investments, foreign and domestic, to develop the economy of Armenia. I'm not sure that Armenia's economic development and future security will depend on transportation fees. They may be important. These transportation routes will open up other avenues of income, but I don't know if that will be the major factor in Armenia's economic development.
Okay, so let's move on here to the second question is to Gerard. What factors changed the status of Armenia versus Baku since the 1990s when Armenia had the upper hand?
What factors changed the relationship?
The status of Armenia versus Baku.
Well, I would say two factors. One is that the leadership of Armenia after the 1990s for 2 decades and the first couple of years of the Pashinyan government assumed our continuation of Armenian supremacy and minimized what Azerbaijan was doing militarily. That's one. And the second, which is a corollary, is that they assumed that the facts on the ground would not change, that Armenia need not make any compromises, or Karabakh would not make any compromises. So you go, it's like I've written 10, 15 years ago, you're playing poker, you are dealt 5 cards, and you've got good cards, and the others don't, and then you stick to your 5 cards, and the others change 3 of their 5 cards, and you're still holding what you have, and you assume the others don't have anything better. That's what we did. We played poker instead of playing chess, which we were playing at the time. They played poker, and they ended up with an Azerbaijan that said, look, enough is enough.
Okay, the next thing is a statement that it says, I agree with Mr. Libaridian about avoiding isolation and participating in transportation networks for supply chains of commodities and manufacturing goods. But more important is foreign investment of like NVIDIA and other ICT companies, making Armenia a major exporter of digitized services. Any comments you want to make, Gerard?
Well, what NVIDIA is doing is not services for foreign countries. NVIDIA will be provider of new projects and new programs. It's a very different thing. It's not like a company in Silicon Valley giving $20,000 to some group in Armenia to develop a program. What NVIDIA is imagining is much, much bigger. And this is where the difference is. And the fact that NVIDIA is investing, and Modertor and the team company in Yerevan, the 5 groups, the 5 people who are doing this in Armenia, $500 million investment. It is very different than doing a $100,000 investment in Armenian programmers for American companies. These will be Armenian production of new projects and new programs in AI, internationally. There will not be anything like it in the whole region, from Russia down to Iran, from the Gulf to Turkey. There's nothing like it. So it is a very different imagination of the future of Armenia.
Okay, so next question is to understand the motives of the adversary. What are all the benefits that Azerbaijan is getting out of these agreements?
Well, Azerbaijan, when we say Azerbaijan, we think of Aliyev, right? That is, first of all, as far as the people of Azerbaijan, the likelihood of a new war has diminished tremendously. You know, Azerbaijani mothers are also mothers. Wives are also wives. Sisters are also sisters. And they don't want their children to go to war. So this diminishes. This is something that is very, very critical. And we don't think of them normally, but we should, number one. Number two, the economy, the investments. While the military can continue, it doesn't have to be as an immediate project, but they can invest in other areas of the economy. Number three, Aliyev himself gets a reprieve from international condemnation as an authoritarian figure. And he can get, he thinks anyway, investments in its hydrocarbon resource development, because it is in some ways in trouble. It is not so secure for the next 5-10 years. So investments had stopped. Now with the MOU, with the agreement between Azerbaijan and ExxonMobil, you know, they expect some new investments. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know. But Azerbaijan gets a lot of it, and it becomes a peacemaker, to be seen as someone who made peace. It's as important to Aliyev, despite our misgivings. It's important to him. So Azerbaijan gets something out of it.
Okay, so next question is, Mevri corridor will help to open railroad via Julia, Nakhichevan, Iran, that will be the only uninterrupted railroad between Russia and Iran. So eventually they may be first beneficiaries. So the question to you, Gerard, what do you think?
I think that's a reasonable scenario. And that's, I think, the debate within Iran, within the government, on whether they look at the benefits to Iran or see it as a geopolitical threat. That debate is going on. I think it's a reasonable scenario. But we need to understand that so far, we really do not know what the transit route will look like. Railroad, highway. But we also should not, that is, we don't know the specifics. What kind of presence will a third-party American corporation or whatever be there to answer to the demand by Baku that there be unimpeded access? We don't know what that means. So to assume things is not correct, is not the right way to do it.
Okay, next question is, what are the main points of contention between your assessment of the agreement and that of President Levon Ter-Petrosyan?
Well, that's not that relevant, is it?
Yeah.
It's not that relevant. I have
Yeah.
disagreements. He has disagreements. We meet all the time. We discuss them. And, you know, I present my position. He presents his. But we have a continuing dialogue.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. So next one is, please comment on the rights of Artsakh Armenians to return and accountability for the ethnic cleansing committed by Azerbaijan in the context of all this.
The right of return can be said that it is a right that is legitimate. The question is that, is it a practical thing? This is a very complicated and very emotional issue. The right of return, let's translate it to something practical. Under what circumstances would this be practical? I know Karabakh leaders, whoever has reached Yerevan instead of Baku prisons, which is a very painful issue. They talk about it, but they talk about returning with international guarantees. Now, they were there. This is very painful to affirm. As I've done in the past, I have to be thinking in real terms. Karabakh Armenians were in Karabakh. They had the international guarantees in the form of the Russian protection. And that did not work. Now, if I'm a Karabakh Armenian, I'm going to return as a community with some rights under protection of some. What international force are we talking about? OSCE has been impotent for years. US, Europe looked at it and did nothing when the ethnic cleansing was taking place. Aliyev offered them a solution. You can stay as individuals and families, but not as an Armenian people within Karabakh. Right or wrong, this option was there. Armenians did not like it. Armenians in Karabakh said, we will be subject to genocide if we are under Azerbaijan. And they believed that they would be killed, all of them, if they were under Azerbaijan. And, you know, I had contacts with them long after I'd left the Armenian government, and I talked to them and explained that you have to go to a compromise. Otherwise, you're going to be kicked out. And believing that it would be genocide means that you have no choice. They were kicked out. There was ethnic cleansing. In itself, it is a very, very sad moment for all of us and in our history. But that was their decision, not to stay because they were going to be subject of genocide. Now, what has changed to argue that they should return, other than the moral right? Maybe the international right, but really, international right was argued for for decades by Garapal Armenians, by international figures. Garapal has the right to independence, to secession like Kosovo. That's true. But what happened actually? Did we have the means to back it up? We didn't. And now we want to return, and we want to make it an essential part of our politics. You know, President Putin apparently a couple of weeks ago made a statement at the Moscow House of Nationalities, or Nationalities House, where it said Garapal had the right to secede. Okay? Can you imagine? He thinks we are idiots. I know he's not an idiot. He thinks we are idiots. That is, for decades, Russia never recognized the right of Garapal to secede. Russia always maintained the right of the Azerbaijan's territorial integrity. Always. After the 2020 war, twice at least, President Putin said Garapal belongs to Azerbaijan. And they said nothing when they watched Garapal Armenians being ethnically cleansed. What is he doing now? What are these people, Putin or Europeans? What are they doing? What are they doing to our people? They're manipulating our emotions, our sense of injustice one more time in history. But they're also responsible for all of that. They're responsible for it. And now they talk about the return. Did any European country or the US said anything more than being concerned about the ethnic cleansing when it was happening? None of them. Not Russia, not France, not any European country, not the US. No one did. So what are we talking about when we say we have the right to return, as if it is an actual program that can be implemented? I'm sorry to say, but that issue has ended. It will not happen. But it has some use in Armenia's domestic politics. It is the same thing as demanding Western Armenia in Armenia's domestic politics. If we don't demand it, then we're not good Armenians. Well, a good Armenian for me is one who takes responsibility for his mistakes, responsibility which leaders of Armenia and Garapal have not taken, for not doing a compromise and instead going for the maximum and receiving nothing. I want to see an answer. What responsibility have leaders taken for 20 years and more for not reaching a compromise when we knew in the long run we could not keep things?
Okay. So the next one has to do again with the Russian military presence. So Can the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan be implemented without removing the Russian military base from Armenia? Is it mandatory?
No, not according to these documents. There's nothing in these documents. If the Russian base was near a border, yes, border with Azerbaijan, not Turkey. If it was in the border with Azerbaijan, yes, these agreements would expect that third-party armed forces be removed. But the Russian base is not on the Azerbaijani border.
Okay. So the next one has to do with Israel and Turkey. So possibility of Israeli and Turkey engaging in a military war in Syria. Is there an escalation, in your opinion, between Azerbaijan and Russia, and what positions we need to take?
I don't see the relationship between the two questions.
Yeah.
Confrontation between Israel and Turkey? It's possible, but not likely. I don't think either one of them want to do that. Is it possible? Yes. Now, what is the second question? Is about Europe. I don't understand the.
Yeah, I think we should move on here. So, so the next.
It's between Azerbaijan and Israel.
No, how do you? Yeah, and then the next one: how do you see the possibility of the signing of the peace agreement without or before the constitutional referendum in Armenia?
You know, I don't know. I don't think it will happen. But I don't know how important that is. Because the principles have been adopted. Aliyev has said the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan is over. He has made those statements. So for all practical purposes, both the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the joint statement, principles stated in the joint statement, are in effect. That is, the conflict is over.
So the next one has to do with what might be wrong with Pashinyan's vision of Azeri, Turkish, Russian, and Iranian engagement. Might there be a Western push to turn Armenia into a dispensable pawn to squeeze Russia and Iran in service of foreign interests?
Well, it's possible to imagine such a scenario. I'm not privy to the kind of information that would tell me yes or no, but I know that one has to look at Pashinyan's evolution in his thinking of Armenia in the last few years. And I think what he's doing with Azerbaijan and Turkey and its neighbors, what he's doing is part of another vision of an Armenia that it belongs in the region and deals with the problems with its neighbors and tries to minimize the problems.
So next statement. I agree with the professor's skepticism of American staying power in the South Caucasus, especially under this administration. Therefore, is Yerevan merely pursuing the strategy as a means by which to offset or forestall any escalation, particularly in Armenia's south? You mentioned that Baku also appears supportive, satisfied with the Washington agreements. What is your assessment as to why Azerbaijan is okay with the agreement, given the uncertainty regarding Washington's policy making?
Well, you know, diplomacy and development of relations are a continuing process. That is, you cannot be 100% sure. You can have all kinds of doubts, but whether these doubts will be proven to be valid or not depends on what you do. That is, peace is a constant process. It's not just the signing of an agreement. Peace, the implementation of elements of the peace agreement require daily taking care of. And what you say and do matters to Aliyev, and what Aliyev says does matter to Armenia. We have to realize this is the kind of relationship which requires constant care, just as independence does in our region of the world, on a daily basis. On a daily basis. You cannot sit on your laurels because you signed a piece of a paper. But the piece of paper is a commitment. And now you act in a way, and this applies to Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey and Iran and Russia, you act in a way that reinforces rather than weakens. But that also applies to the Armenian domestic forces in Armenia and the diaspora. You know, what we do and say in the diaspora matters a bit, but it matters. It matters. And we have to take responsibility for that. Is peace important for Armenia? Is strengthening Azerbaijan's sense that Armenia should have territorial integrity and sovereignty and non-use of force to settle remaining issues, is that important for us as Armenians? This is the question we have to ask. It is a daily chore. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. That makes it important that we realize, all of us individually, as groups, as political parties, that how does what we say fit into the larger purpose of strengthening Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the adversary's sense of what we are.
Okay, so can we really say Artsakh Armenians had a choice under the threat of genocide? Isn't that the problem with genocide? That is, it represents a situation in which the target group has no true choices but are forced into a double bind. There might not be a solution, but pretending they had a choice ends up blaming them rather than acknowledging the impossibility of the situation.
Well, when I know that's a very common perception, that they didn't have a choice. If that is true, then why do they think they have a choice now? Why do they think there's a choice now? You can't argue both that they didn't have a choice, but they should return. I don't understand that. It's either one or the other. But I know that there was a choice. That is, they could have accepted a compromise solution which at least gave them a chance to stay on their lands. Okay? And what they did to our people in Garapal was not in any moral or legal sense acceptable, but you have to realize that there was no willingness on the part of the Garapal Armenians to look at any other scenario. Now, also, we have to realize, whether we like it or not, accept it or not, Azerbaijan says, what we did to your people, you did to our people in Armenia. you did to our people in the 7 districts that went under Armenian control, other than Karabakh. You know, when we think about what they did, we should not forget about what we did. And what we did was at least 650,000 Azeris ethnically cleansed. Do we accept that or not? It's not by ignoring those facts that we can make a decent argument. You know, if we're not honest, completely honest with ourselves, we cannot do future policy. We cannot. We will continue making the same mistakes. Did we ethnically cleanse Armenia? Azerbaijan did. We did. Did we ethnically cleanse 7 districts outside of Karabakh? Not just Karabakh. Do we take responsibility for it? Was that a bad thing or a good thing? For our security, for our whatever? But that's what we did. I cannot really accept seriously a question which may seem valid on the surface. I cannot accept it if the author of the question does not accept responsibility for what we did. Ours was justified ostensibly, and theirs is not. We really have to stop thinking as if we were children going home complaining, Mama, Bobby hit me. As if the kid had done nothing. And Mama will have to ask, what happened? What did you do? But we're not children. We shouldn't act like children. If we want to be serious about politics, we have to accept responsibility for what we did and what we said. This is not easy for me to say. It's extremely painful as a historian, as an Armenian, as a human being. It's extremely painful. But I cannot justify some things with it and then expect that the others will take responsibility and then repair. It's too late in my life.
Gerard, the next one is, have we sacrificed our ICJ court cases for the case of peace? And do you believe in world justice anymore?
World justice works only when there are no vital interests involved. There's no world justice. There's the concept of world justice. You know, Gandhi was once asked, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, it's a good idea. That's all it is. It's a good idea. We strive. Sometimes we achieve. You know, we go forward. And then, as it's happening in the US, we go backward. World justice. Now, but also, there's another aspect to this. We go to the International Court, and Azerbaijan goes to the International Court. Just think of international law that can be used by Azerbaijan against Armenians and Armenia. Just think about it. The destruction that happened in the 7 districts that came under Armenian control in 1990s. So it works both ways. You know, saying I'm right doesn't mean that you haven't done any wrong. Again, this is not easy for me to say. But if we want to be dealing with actual policy and strategy, we cannot claim the moral higher ground where we are also vulnerable.
Gerard, next one has to do with the prisoners in Baku. Why do you think the Armenian prisoners in Baku are not being released if you think Aliyev is genuine in his desire for peace?
The desire for peace does not have much to do with the logic of his imprisonment. That is, from his point of view, these were renegade, secessionist leaders of an Azerbaijani district, and they need to be punished. This is not unusual. I'm not justifying it. I'm trying to explain it in order to answer the question. This is an issue that is extremely, extremely important, because these people are our brothers, and most of them I've worked with closely and I respect and like very much. I may not have agreed with their policies, but I worked with them closely. But this is not something that could be resolved in the context of a peace agreement. This is one of those issues that will have to be addressed more seriously once a little more trust has been established between the two countries, once we have developed a closer collaboration, and then I think the resolution of that issue will be easier.
Okay.
The Spanish government put in prison the leaders of the secessionists, right? It happens. It happens everywhere. Now, again, on a personal basis and on the basis of our collective consciousness, this is not acceptable. But in practical terms, what are the best chances of getting these people released? It is to get the peace agreement, to minimize, fears and to minimize what Aliyev feels should be done in terms of asserting his state territorial integrity and those who go against it. I think we have a better chance when we do have a peace agreement and we build more trust.
Okay. So back to the Turkey and Armenia issue. Do you think any border normalization between Turkey and Armenia will proceed in parallel with Armenia-Azerbaijan peace progress?
In parallel, yes. In parallel, that is, we have to get to, unfortunately, Turkey is not in a position to make independent policy overall. It may at some point take some practical steps, but at this point, I don't see it. I don't see it without going through a full signature of the peace agreement and a clearer picture of what the transit route looks like.
Next one has to do with the imperial mindset. It's a comment by one of the viewers here. Imperial mindset of Russia. What about the imperial mindset of the USA that extends many times more than Russia worldwide, with total destruction and control in the Middle East, and has nothing and does nothing to stop the genocide in Gaza?
The imperial mindset? Well, the US imperial mindset is a more active one because the empire has not ended yet. The US empire is receding. So it's a more complicated mindset than the Russian that saw the Soviet Union collapse, the Ottoman that ended with the First World War, the Iranian that ended 200 years ago. The imperial mindset, as you know, was a term I coined, and the US mindset is a little different. It involves that mindset, but it is a little more because it still has military capabilities. So it's not, in this case, there's a complication, particularly with Gaza. There's a genocide going on in Gaza, no doubt. There's no other explanation for what the Israeli government is doing. And that's one of the reasons why I do not trust Trump diplomacy, because that means Trump can sell any people anytime for any reason. So I agree with the question of the from the public. I agree with it. That raises questions on President Trump's commitment to any set of values, and they certainly don't include the people of Palestine, and they may not include any other people. But it's a process of the recession of the US empire that makes it possible for a Netanyahu to do that. That is, in this case, it is Netanyahu that's basically deciding US policy. You know, that's not an empire that has ended and now the central power, the core power is exercising, excuse me, it's exercising a post-imperial mindset. This is still an imperial mindset that is an imperial process of loss and retreat that is now being dominated by a regional imperial power, which is in full expansion of the empire. That is the Israeli government.
There's a note here from Henry Thoreau. My screen is fuzzy. You know him, right? Henry.
I have never met him.
Okay, well, this I must be misunderstanding Dr. Libaridian. I thought you just said that today there is no real right to return, and thus Armenians from NK have no real choice now. Could you clarify? And he goes on to say, I'm happy to have a public discussion with you as you are making very serious assumptions about the author's, my position, as a way of avoiding the author's questions. Perhaps ARPA can set one up.
Perhaps what?
ARPA can set one up, a discussion between the two of you.
Look, I didn't say they have no right to return. I don't need a debate for that. Yeah. I didn't say they have. I said they had the right to return, but I said I see no practical route. That's all. I don't go into debates with every questioner.
Yeah. Okay, we have one last comment in here. That's to do with Professor Jeffrey Sachs claimed that the Trump road will be used by America to instigate trouble and instability around Russia. Would you agree? Is there anything we can include in the agreement to minimize the chances of that from happening?
Well, that the US can use it, of course. I'm not sure of the answer until we see the actual project in detail. But also, I think it's a matter of the government of Armenia to make sure that it doesn't happen. And I think the government of Armenia is quite conscious of that. They have good relations with Iran. They have good relations, well, at least good contacts with Russia. So I think these are works in progress. I do not trust American foreign diplomacy. I agree with the viewer. I've seen what it has done in South America, in the Middle East, and overall. But this is both countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, had their own reasons why they did this thing in Washington. And Washington, excuse me, benefited from it. But as to what follows, these are not fixed things, these are moving stuff. And I think the government of Armenia can be quite conscious of the danger, and they've made many statements to the position of Yerevan against any such use.
I think we have some last, let me see here. So the next one has to do with the potential Azeri-Russian conflict. What do you think the Azeri-Russian conflict is, or are heading? What should be our position towards this new conflict?
Well, I don't think we should intervene in that. I think the conflict has some depth, but it doesn't mean that it will lead to military conflict. The political conflict can continue. There will be continuing contacts between Baku and Moscow. The vice president of Azerbaijan, Mrs. Aliyev, went to Moscow, met with Putin. They will continue. Aliyev will continue its contacts with Russia, with Europe, with Iran, and of course, Turkey. So these are very fluid situations. We shouldn't put any hope on Azeri-Russian military confrontation. It's not good for us. We don't want any more military confrontations.
Okay, I think we're coming to the end here. Let's see. I have this is one of the participants says, Asad Pogorian says, I'm sure you read James O'Brien's article about Armenia being a big loser in this peace agreement signing. What are your thoughts? I think we covered this, right?
I'm sorry to say I haven't read O'Brien's.
Yeah.
If I read everything that's written, I have no time to write myself. So yeah. I'm sorry to say, there are many articles I haven't read. Some I have, but my comments about the imperial mindset, my comments about assuming the 100% loss, 100% gain, these don't interest me much. It's the big movement, the more fundamental dynamics of big powers and small powers that interest me, and I try to give my best.
Perfect, Gerard. Thank you so much. This has gone longer than I thought it will. We had a huge number of questions. You addressed them all. I want to, on behalf of ARPA and the audience here, I want to thank you for a very insightful session. So, and folks, all of this has been, Hagop has basically recorded all of this, and he will send it out in the next mailing. But if you don't receive it, drop him a note and you should be able to get the recording. So Gerard, I want to thank you again. It was a splendid session, and I want to thank all the audience and all the great questions that you guys forwarded, and we went through most of them.
Thank you, Hriar, and thank you, Hagop, and thank you, the audience, for very, very normal, very good questions. And I hope I've addressed them.
Yes, I think
until next time. Thank you, Hagop.
Thank you all.
Yes, I think you have, Gerard, and thank you very much for your excellent presentation and answers. And thank you, Hriar, for the excellent moderation as always. Thank you all for participating. And let me announce that we will have another session, a panel discussion this time, next Saturday, and it will be on the latest developments again about Armenia and around Armenia, and the participants this time will be it will be on the 6th of December. I mean 6th of I'm sorry, September, and it will again be moderated by our Hriar Cabayan, and it will be on again this same topic. The participants will be Nerses Kopalyan, Anna Ohanyan, and several others. And the next day, on Sunday, we also have another panel discussion, this time about wine technology in Armenia. You're all welcome, and you will receive the announcement soon. Thank you all for participating, and hope to see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.